I think when we're getting into a relationship, we can spot some really big red flags right away. And these are my big red flags as I'm starting to date somebody. They're abusive. They have a past history of abuse with another significant other, whether that's emotional, financial, or physical abuse. They lie. They exhibit extreme tendencies for jealousy. I want to talk about today is the not so obvious red flags. Let's get into it.
Welcome to today's episode of Dating at Her Age, and I would hope that I would be able to see all the very vibrant red flags, but I am sure that there are many that can get overlooked.
I have a list, Caitlyn, of 8 not so obvious red flags. I want to dive into each one of them and dissect them with you. I think these are the red flags that we try to maybe ignore because we don't think they're that big of a deal. Or maybe the person, if we talk to them about it, they can do better next time. But these, I think, can develop into worse behaviors if they're not addressed or if that person isn't willing to address them.
Yeah, and you're holding on to the potential, which I know that we're all guilty of. So I'm excited to learn about your specific list.
I want to make sure that we realize that I'm not keeping a scorecard here.
Yeah.
This isn't like I have a checklist of 8, and if they check 1 or 2 of the boxes, the relationship's over. No, these are just red flags that I have noticed while dating I need to pay attention to. And generally, these aren't just a one-time issue, right? It's not that they do it one time and then it's over. It's a pattern that I'm looking for. So at the top of my list, no particular order, I think aggressive driving. If you're in a car with somebody and they're aggressively driving, or if they're talking about encounters that they've had involving road rage, I think that's a red flag because we have to share the road. Of all the things in life, we know that the road is one thing we all have to share. So if they're not willing to share the road and they're also putting you at risk or other people at risk if you're in their car with them, I think this is a really, really big red flag. I think a lot of people will overlook it and they'll just be uncomfortable with it, but they really won't say anything about it and they won't necessarily dump the guy or the gal for it. I'm not just saying this is just for men. I think this is men and women. If you're in a relationship with somebody who is aggressively acting aggressively behind the wheel of a car and putting other people at risk, I think this is a red flag for how they could potentially treat you behind closed doors. Yeah,
that's what I was just going to say, is that would be a hard one for me to overlook if it happened more often than once, where you could see aggression, because, who's to say they wouldn't be aggressive towards you? And I think that would scare me enough to keep a very open eye about that.
I actually posted this piece of advice on my TikTok page, and somebody commented that she was out with a man on a date. The man was playing chicken with an 18-wheeler.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. She said, sounds like she exited the car and never looked back.
Yeah, good job on taking that action.
I don't even think it has to be that aggressive.
Yeah.
I think it can be tailgating. I think it could be cutting people off. I think it could be yelling at other drivers. I once went on a date with a man who said that his car had stalled out in the middle of a road and somebody honked or was kind of how people get impatient. They don't really realize that you're stalled and you can't do anything, but the person behind you is honking and they're being aggressive toward you. And eventually he said he got out of his car, and I'm like, okay, I wasn't with him. Obviously, This is before we got on our first date. And I was like, you got out of your car, and he went over and he gave him a piece of his mind. And I was like, this sounds like this is nothing that I want to have anything to do with, because what if I'm in the car? And then if you have kids, young kids, what if they're in the car with them eventually?
It also just shows kind of how they handle being under pressure or any sort of high intensity thing, which I don't know, driving can be pressure, but not that much.
So I think that's one not so obvious red flag that we might tend to dismiss or overlook. The second one that I have on my list is when you go to a restaurant with them, don't go just to enjoy the appetizers and the main course. Pay attention to how they treat the waitstaff.
Oh, that is a big thing for me. I've seen people disrespect others, and that is a no-go for me. There is no reason to be rude to people who are taking time working to serve you.
Well, and the restaurant is a perfect place, in my view, to observe this kind of behavior because you're a captive audience.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just you and him or you and her or whatever at a table with a third person coming over and, as you said, trying to serve you. And how do they treat them? Are they disrespectful to them? Do they send their food back a lot? I'm not a big send my food back person anyway, so that always makes me feel uncomfortable.
I will literally eat cold food before I send it back because I'm not confrontational.
Raw steak?
But yeah.
Bring me more.
Yeah. But yeah.
I didn't really want these mashed potatoes mashed at all. I'm happy to eat them right out of the Idaho potato sack.
Yeah, the super picky nitty gritty, like
it's
sending it back for no reason. I think it's, it could, if it's very loud and if the server's done absolutely nothing to deserve any sort of, I don't even think they deserve it if they are being disrespectful to them. You just treat people with kindness.
You never know what kind of day they're having. Right.
Yeah.
So I also think, I look at, do they tip? And I do not appreciate getting into a debate on a date over whether tipping should be a thing. Hey, tip, you might not tip as, I think I consistently tip 20%. I've done that my whole life because my dad was a short order cook. That's what he said. He was a short order cook, probably back in the 60s. And he would say the wait staff would come in sometimes just, crying because people didn't leave them a tip. And that was how they made their money. I mean, in Utah, they get paid they don't get paid even, I don't think, minimum wage in Utah in many cases. So they survive on tips. And I think I look at that and I'm like, if you're not tipping, that's not my vibe.
Yeah, if you're at a sit-down restaurant where someone, like I said, is serving you, absolutely.
But most of all, are they respectful to the wait staff? I think
just shows who they are as a person if they're not.
And if you got into a relationship with a person like that, how uncomfortable would that be? Always going out to dinner and feeling that sort of like,
I would feel so much like anxiety all the time.
Yeah.
Major cringe.
So that was my second one. I'm glad you thought that was a big deal.
That one's a big deal to me. Just be a human. We're all humans. Be nice to other humans.
So this is the third one. And I actually found this one on a comment that was left on my video of like not so obvious red flags that I posted on TikTok. And this commenter said, along these lines, do they check in on you to make sure you got to your car? And then I added this, do they check to make sure you got home safely? Because these days, of course, for our own safety, if we don't know somebody really well, which, by the way, remember, we're all dating strangers on the internet these days. We're meeting in person. Now, they might say, well, I don't want them to walk me to my car because I get that. Like, that's, maybe we're 4 or 5, 6 dates in now and we're feeling more comfortable and you're still meeting them. But do they walk you to your car to make sure that you get to your car safely? And do they check in on you to make sure you got home safely? I think this shows a level of caring and concern. So I went on a date with a guy and we'd met at a restaurant. And what surprised me about kind of what transpired was that I've known this person for a pretty long time. So I left the restaurant before he did, and I got a ride share. I got an Uber home. And it was like a 30-minute Uber ride home. Never heard from him. Never checked on me to make sure I made it home. It was I think I left it about midnight. It was now I'm a big girl. I've been in a lot of situations professionally and personally where I don't need people to check on me. But I felt like after a date like that, let's follow up with each other and make sure we're if at the very least we're okay and we're safe. But I think if that progressive that they just don't care enough to make sure you're okay, I think that's a red flag.
Well, it also just shows how into the beginning stages of the relationship, how committed they may be to making it work, is just following up. Because I think my natural instinct, if I had a good time on the day, I would probably text them and say, hope you got home, like just made it home, hope you have a good night. That's what I would say. But you do need to see it on both sides.
Yeah. Here's my fourth one. How do they speak about their ex?
Big. That is a big one, which, there may be some unfinished business, which they may be needing to heal. But that could also mean how they may speak about you and just overall people they're in relationships with. That I listen when people start doing that because they may not realize what they're doing. But if it's very negative, I'm always thinking, okay, well, what's her side of the story or what's their side of the story?
Oh, right.
Yeah, because maybe they were a terrible person.
That's an important point. You're only hearing one side of the story.
Maybe that's just my brain. And I'm like, okay, well, there's another situation here, but I don't think, what if you were the problem? Which, you never know, really. But I listen when people start doing that.
Well, to your point, I do think it can indicate that they aren't healed.
Yeah.
I think you're always going to you're never going to, if you're in a relationship and it's moving forward, there's going to be times when there's going to be issues that pop up with your ex-spouse or something like that you might confide in the person you're dating. But if it is a consistent line of insults, she or he is always the problem, that's a drain on the relationship.
Yeah, that's a big turnoff for me too if I'm listening to that, because I would consider myself a girl's girl. So if we're talking about me going on a date with a man who's talking about another woman like that, I would be like, well, I think I might be on her side just because of the way you're talking about her right now. So
that was my fourth one. My fifth one is, what do you think about this one? The person sucks the life out of you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I mean by this is, do you become smaller, a smaller version of yourself? Are you disappearing from your own life to accommodate their life or their demands? Mm-hmm. And it's exhausting you. I think this is a red flag. I think we excuse it as, I'm just trying to make this relationship work, so I'm willing to accept it. But where's it going to go from there? You're just going to keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. If they're sucking the life out of you and their presence isn't helping you be a better version of you, then I think they're sucking the life out of you. I think we need to look at that as a red flag. I think we also need to look into our crystal ball and say, what am I going to look like in 5 years from now if I stay in this situation?
And I think that is actually a very difficult one to spot within a relationship, because you may not realize it for a long time that it's happening.
Do you think this is the point where you lean on friends and you listen to friends?
Probably, because they're going to have that outside view of, you before, you during, and maybe after. And the only way you really can figure that out for yourself is if you create some space between you and that relationship. Because that's when I can see it. I feel like I've been in that situation where I've been more of the giver and not been receiving, but you don't realize it very much when you're in it until after.
So let's expand on that. If we're the ones that are always chasing the relationship to see if they'll accept us, or, at least pay attention to us, that can also be a way of getting the life sucked out of us.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. We're so focused on winning in that situation, we're actually losing. Mm-hmm. We're so focused on winning that we stop paying attention to our own lives, things that are important to us. I actually have talked about this before, that I had one of my children say in one of my relationships that I was basically like disappearing.
Yeah. And that's the voice that you sometimes need, is just that outsider perspective. Because, I think that one's a really hard one to see sometimes.
I also would add to that is be open to when your friends and your family say something. They're not wrong.
Not always, yeah, but
not always.
I agree. I think
their opinion is not wrong. It's their opinion.
Right.
But if they've noticed something, then I would
sit with it, think about it. Yeah.
Like, they're noticing something. And they're concerned. And they're saying it from a place of love. When your kid says, Mom, you're disappearing.
Yeah. And it probably was hard for them to even bring that up, too, because it's not something they want to confront, but it matters. So
I love that as one of the tips. My next tip, it has to do with, your professional life or whatever you're into. Like, if you have a career, if you don't have a career, if there's something really important in your life, you could even say, well, this could also include your family or a favorite hobby, or maybe you're going back to school and you're pursuing a degree or an MBA. Do they hold you accountable for all the ills in that profession or with your family or with, the direction your life is taking? And what I mean by this is an example that happened to me. Is I'm in the news business, right? Journalism is in my veins. I've been in journalism since the 80s. I've been a television news reporter for decades. I've said that. You guys know that. So I was dating a man, and we were just starting out in the relationship, and it was very obvious to me that there was no love lost for the media. And I think it was the particular issue that was happening. It was the beginning of the pandemic, and he was upset about some things. I think there was a lot of confusion on everybody's part in the beginning of the pandemic, something that many of us have never lived through before. And it was the end of the first week. So, and we've been on the air here at KSL News Radio talking about this, trying to give people information. I was pretty exhausted by the end of that week. And of course, I was also worried about my own family, right? Safety, my parents, all the things that we were all worried about. Like, we didn't know. 2020 hindsight is different than being in the moment. But yeah, he called me up or texted me or something like that. And it was like, I felt like I was being held accountable as a sole journalist who was on the air for all the things that he didn't like about what was going on. Now, that relationship, it wasn't going anywhere probably anyway. But what I'm saying is, like, how would you feel if somebody you were with was always holding you accountable for things that were wrong? Like, what if you're in the medical profession, or you're a police officer, or you're a firefighter, you're a news reporter, I think if they're constantly taking out their concerns about that industry on you, I think that's a red flag. I think there's a likelihood they don't support that situation fully. And I think there's a stronger likelihood that you're never going to be able to live it down. And that is a hard situation to find yourself in.
Well, and I think that it just boils down to a lack of understanding or wanting to understand, because I guess you could be ignorant at the beginning of something and having a conversation about that. But if there's no movement on wanting to understand it further, I could definitely see that happening. I feel like I am going through that right now with just relationships in my life, just because I do work in media, and the media always gets a lot of questions with things going on in the world. And so I'm not the forefront of that, but I do work in the industry. So I've experienced that a little bit.
Yeah. And it would be really difficult if that person you're dating didn't want to get to know more about it and understand it more and hear your point of view. But this could apply to any industry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was even thinking real estate. Sometimes that could be controversial, investments. Sometimes that could be controversial. So I think that's a red flag. We shouldn't discount it. Doesn't mean that you can't overcome it through conversation. I think that's important here too. Like, it doesn't mean you can't overcome it by saying, hey, that's just not going to fly for me. Is there a way we can work through this together? I think you have a bad taste in your mouth about the media. So let's come to the newsroom. I'm going to show you how a day in the life. Let's hang out together. Let's go to lunch, and you can come to the newsroom or whatever and hang out. We can talk about it more, and so you can understand how decisions are made. But they have to be open to that too. Yeah.
And I think it also matters how you respond to those types of things, because you don't want to be too defensive to push them out completely. So that's the optimist in me.
Okay, the next one is, do they seem to want you to save them? So let me bring up my example of the date I went on. I kind of tried to laugh this off as a joke. I didn't take it as a joke, where he leaned over the table and asked me to marry him for my health insurance benefits.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah,
And that's not the only example. I have other examples. Are they in it to have you save them?
Yeah.
Because there's only one person in charge of their lives, and that's them.
It is 100%. Yeah. Because they just want to, that's just manipulation and just trying to use somebody, is how I see that.
Do you ever get worried about being used?
I am probably too naive to see that if it happens. But yeah, I would probably take signs like that. I don't think I would be.
That's pretty obvious.
I mean, maybe I would be in that situation, but I am a helper and a fixer-ish type. I've been better. But so I think I would be like, oh, let me do that. But I would also proceed with caution based off of a lot of conversations that we've had, learning, when you're being taken advantage of. So yes, obviously I'm worried of that, but I would hope that I'm not faced with that situation.
This is just my opinion. I feel like when people float ideas out there, but then they try to write it off as a joke. First of all, I think jokes are inherently meant to be funny, and if nobody at the table's laughing, I also think they're floating it out there to see if there's any sort of interest, if they can draw you into that. And so I think that's a red flag.
Yep.
I think anytime somebody asks you, even jokingly, to make a massive life decision when you've just met them, or even if you've been dating for a little while, that doesn't feel like the right time, I think that's a red flag. And I would look at something like that. With my rose-colored glasses, off.
Yeah.
I think that if it's my health insurance today, what is it tomorrow? And what am I in for in this situation? So that was my next red flag. And then my final red flag is, and it just depends on, of course, they may or may not have children, but do they have a relationship with their kids? And I'll just speak at it from my perspective, dating men who are, obviously probably more my age, in their 50s. They have kids. They're divorced. I look at this, if they don't have a good relationship with their kids, I have to ask myself, why not? Because parents are supposed to parent.
Mm-hmm.
I will always be a parent to my 3 kids. My 3 kids should not be tracking me down to, make sure we have a good relationship. I'm the one that's supposed to be forging that relationship with them. Now, we're all adults, right? So certainly my kids reach out to me and say, hey, can we go to lunch? Or do you have time to talk? Yeah. But do they have a good relationship with their kids? I'll tell you what, my experience, again, happens if they don't have a good relationship with their kids, that spills over into the situation, like maybe they don't have a good relationship with their children's mother. And then what becomes of you in that scenario?
You become in the middle of it, essentially.
You're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You are literally suddenly finding yourself nominated president of the no winning club.
Yeah.
Nominated and appointed of president of the no winning club. So it doesn't mean there cannot be ups and downs with relationships with kids. And look, I get it. Kids, change in life. There's issues. Everybody has a different scenario. But and also, to that in that respect, you also want to be careful if all they're doing is trying to save their children, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and then it's like that becomes exhausting too. But in general, what is their relationship with the kids? And are they driving and trying to forge a positive relationship with the kids? Because I think if they have a good relationship with the kids, hopefully odds are they have a healed and good relationship with their kid's mother. Mm-hmm. I think that is so important. I think it's a red flag, and I'm not sure how easy it is to overcome if you're the outsider trying to get in this.
That's really hard.
This really uncomfortable situation.
Well, I think about that too because I am 30 now. We've reached the age. I don't have to say 29 anymore. I can finally say 30. But it's very common, people that I may be dating may have kids. It's not completely it is not abnormal if that happens. And I think that obviously I would probably be dating someone who has young kids. And so something I would watch for is like, are they almost too available? And are they not, unavailable because they have to spend time with their kids? Maybe they're in a situation where it's like every weekend they get the kids, but it's like I would start to ask questions if they mention they have kids, but they're very available to me.
So maybe they don't have a relationship with the kids.
Or do you just not have any visitation? Why did that happen?
That's a good point.
I know there's always so many details to that. That's not always just, black and white with that. But it would make me ask questions and I would wonder. And eventually I think that would become a conversation. But
I also would never want to be in the position where I was taking somebody away from their kids.
Absolutely.
Right. So I'm not going to go into a relationship and say, well, you have to spend time with me. And not your child on their birthday. And I'm dating men with older and grown kids. So, but still, I mean, they should be able to do a road trip with their son if that's what they want.
Yeah, and that comes first. That's number one over me if we're dating for sure. And I think overall, it just could speak to what is their relationship with family. Like, do they have a good relationship with their family, and is that a priority to them? Because that's a priority to me. And obviously, there's so many scenarios where a family can kind of become estranged, I guess, or there's strains on relationships, but family is very important to me, and I would hope that is a good value to people.
Yeah, and if it's important to you with your family, then you're going to make sure it's known that it's important to you that they have a good relationship with their family.
Absolutely.
And I think that it just makes everything much more pleasant. I mean, my goal in this dating world is to find myself in a relationship where it just works. It doesn't feel like hard work. There's work involved, but it just works. It clicks. It clicks on all cylinders. It clicks with him and his kids and his ex-wife, the scenario just clicks and it feels good and it enhances my life, not drains my life. And I would want the same for him.
Mm-hmm.
And if I find out that I'm draining somebody's life, like, what do I need to do to fix it? What do we need to focus on? And what am I doing wrong that I can fix? And if it's not fixable, then we got to talk about going our separate ways. I think a lot of these things, not necessarily all of them, but a lot of these things that I've listed are fixable. The question will be, will they want to fix it?
Yeah, big. Will they want to communicate and will they want to work to fix it? That's the biggest thing in any relationship, I think.
I also think it's important to remember this is just my list. Everybody has their own list.
They're great tips.
It's not comprehensive. There's probably 8 more I could think of, by tomorrow morning if I wanted to. But I think it made me think, what are those things that I tend to dismiss? Probably because I'm looking so desperately for a relationship at times that I'm willing to sacrifice. I don't know that these are total deal breakers. I just think they're red flags kind of halfway up the flagpole. They're not the bright red flags we talked about in the beginning of the episode, but there's a potential for them to get there.
Yeah.
Right?
Keep an eye out and ask questions about those. I think the one that I would add in just my personal one, which we've talked about before, which maybe this is an obvious one to people now. It's obvious to me now, but just inconsistent communication.
Oh, yeah.
And but there's also a layer, understanding someone's communication style, because I do feel like I get different versions of people when I'm in person. And like sometimes I do actually think that sometimes people aren't big texters, but they can text to handle logistics and respond to say yes or no, I can do this, but they don't have to sit and text me all day. But just inconsistency, and if they're giving you little nuggets to hold on to, but then they steer away, because that can keep you in just for a long time. So I just wanted to put that one out there.
So the inconsistent communication looks like you never know when you're going to hear from them.
Yeah, kind of. Or they're there for 1 week and it's really great and exciting and they're fully communicating, and then like the next, you don't hear from them for like a while, but they're giving you little breadcrumbs, like, checking in every now and then, but there's not a lot of movement with that. And you can tell a difference because I've experienced both. So I've experienced a little too much communication, which is not too much. It's just I couldn't handle it. But I have also experienced not enough. And then I can tell the difference of interest levels as well with that. So
I think you have to lean into what your gut tells you.
And understand how people communicate, because we all have our own way of doing it. And sometimes we just have to talk that out. But that's my thing that I keep a close eye on.
All right. Well, everybody needs to now make their own list of not so obvious red flags, and what would those look like in your life.